So, a brand new report has just landed from Parliament's Home Affairs Committee, and wow, it paints a really stark picture of the UK system for housing asylum seekers. We're talking spiralling costs, chaotic management, and contracts that have just ballooned way beyond their original budgets. Alright, let's break down what the report found. Let's just get right to the headline number, because it is a big one. The committee's reporting that the projected cost for the main asylum accommodation contracts, which run for 10 years from 2019 to 2029, has now hit an absolutely staggering £15.3 billion. Now, to really get your head round that number, think about this. When these contracts were first signed, the Home Office figured they'd cost about £4.5 billion over the entire decade. The new forecast is more than triple that original estimate. It's a financial explosion, and that's exactly what the committee tried to get to the bottom of. And listen, the committee, they do not pull any punches. After digging into this for months, this was their final verdict on the whole thing. They called it, quote, a failed, chaotic and expensive system. So the big question is, how on earth did we get here? Well, to understand why the costs went through the roof, you first have to look at the demand. The entire system was just put under this immense pressure from a huge increase in the number of people who needed a place to stay. What's so interesting about this slide is how clearly it shows the scale of that backlog. You know, you had a combination of things happening at once. The pandemic slowing everything down, an increase in small boat arrivals, and even a time when the government paused decision-making. All of that led to this massive peak. More people waiting for much longer meant a desperate scramble for more places to house them. And that huge demand led directly to what the report identifies as the absolute core of the problem. A massive over-reliance on really expensive temporary hotels. Okay, so the system is supposed to work with two kinds of housing. You've got dispersal accommodation, that's the goal. It's longer term, cheaper housing, like flats. Then you have contingency accommodation. That's the emergency button you press when demand gets too high. And in reality, that almost always means hotels. And this chart just says it all, doesn't it? Just look at those purple bars. What was meant to be a short-term emergency measure completely exploded. Using hotels went from being a temporary fix to a widespread, permanent and totally dominant part of the entire asylum system. So, what's the big deal? Well, here's the bottom line. The Home Office itself estimates that housing one person in an hotel costs almost £145 a night. Compare that to just over £23 in regular dispersal housing. That is more than 6 times the price. So, with all this money being spent, who's actually getting paid? Well, the entire system is outsourced to private companies, and the report really digs into the commercial deals that are propping up these massive costs. The whole market is really dominated by just a few big companies, and the report notes that when these contracts were first handed out, there was very little competition, which, really weakened the Home Office's negotiation power right from the start. And here is the fundamental problem the committee found. Because hotels bring in so much more revenue, the private providers actually have a financial incentive to use the most expensive option, the very thing the government's trying to reduce. It's a massive conflict of interest. The report also zooms in on one company in particular, Corporate Travel Management, or CTM. You might remember their name from the COVID quarantine hotel programme. Well, they were awarded a brand new contract worth $550 million just to provide these emergency hotels. So, this raises a pretty obvious question, right? With these huge sums of money flying around, is there any way for us, the taxpayers, to get a share of the profits being made? Well, the answer, coming directly from the Home Office and cited in the report, is a very clear no. The contract with CTM, for example, has no profit sharing, no commission sharing, no mechanism at all for money to come back to the government. Now, the impact of these soaring costs doesn't just stop with the Home Office budget. The report shows it creates these huge ripple effects across other parts of government spending and, of course, on local communities. Take a look at this. This is the total bill for all asylum support. We're talking accommodation, food, the whole shebang. As you can see, the spending just exploded, peaking at a pretty unbelievable £4.7 billion in just 1 year. And a huge chunk of that money had another, maybe unexpected consequence. In 2024-25, £2.22 billion of that asylum support budget was officially classified as overseas development assistance. That means that money that was supposed to be spent on aid projects in other countries was instead diverted to cover costs right here in the UK. And beyond all the money, the report details the very real human and social costs. It talks about immense pressure on local services like schools and doctors in areas with a lot of asylum accommodation. It mentions rising community tensions and serious concerns that the housing itself, especially in hotels, is often completely inadequate for vulnerable people. Okay, so after laying out this really detailed and frankly pretty bleak picture of a system in crisis, the report turns to the most important question: what happens next? Is there actually a way to fix this? The committee points to two really critical dates on the calendar. First, in March 2026, there's a break clause in the contracts. That's the first real chance for the Home Office to end the deals or totally renegotiate them. And then in 2029, the contracts are up completely, meaning a whole new system has to be designed. And the report lays out a pretty clear path forward. First, it says design a system that can actually flex when demand goes up or down. Second, rewrite the contracts so providers are actually rewarded for finding cheaper housing, not expensive hotels. And crucially, the committee's urging the government to get ready to use that 2026 break clause and to make protecting taxpayer money the #1 priority for any future deals. Which really leaves us with the fundamental challenge here. We have a system where billions of pounds have been spent and public trust has been seriously damaged. The final lingering question is whether any new strategy can possibly deliver a system that manages to be both humane and fair to the people caught up in it, while also being affordable and fair to the taxpayer who has to foot the bill.